Welcome, dear listener, to another journey through the quiet corridors of history, where the past unfolds gently before you, inviting you to rest, to reflect, and perhaps to drift into the soft embrace of sleep. Tonight, we wander into the frozen forests of the Ardennes, a place where winter-esque grip tightened around the hearts of men in the waning days of 1944. This is not a tale of grand heroics or sweeping triumphs, but a slow, deliberate exploration of lives caught in the crucible of war lives shaped by cold, hunger, and the unyielding rhythm of survival. Imagine yourself seated by a dim fire, the world outside cloaked in snow. As we step into the past together, the Battle of the Ardennes, often called the Battle of the Bulge, was a desperate clash, a moment when the world seemed to teeter on the edge of collapse. Yet our story tonight is not one of chaos or clamor. Instead, we'll walk through the snow-laden paths of the front lines, linger in the frost-bitten trenches, and listen to the whispers of men who faced the bitter winter and the specter of death. We'll move slowly, savoring the details, the crunch of boots on frozen ground, the faint glow of a cigarette in the dark, the weight of silence between comrades. Let these images settle over you, like a blanket, heavy but comforting as we begin. Our journey unfolds in 4 parts, each a window into the lives and struggles of those who endured the Ardennes. First, we'll immerse ourselves in the daily existence of soldiers American and German huddled in the icy forests, battling not just the enemy but the relentless cold. Then, we'll trace the German counteroffensive, a desperate gamble that shattered the winter's stillness. Next, we'll stand with the defenders of Bastogne, a town that became a symbol of defiance amid the snow. Finally, we'll reflect on the battle's end, its staggering costs, and the quiet echoes it left behind. So, settle in, let your mind soften, and allow the rhythm of history to carry you forward. Close your eyes, if you wish, and picture the Ardennes, a vast, rolling forest, its trees stripped bare, their branches heavy with snow. The air is sharp, biting at the lungs, and the night is alive with the soft creak of frozen pines. This is where we begin, with the men who stood watch in the cold, their breath visible in the moonlight, their lives tethered to the simple act of enduring one more hour, one more night. Let's step into their world now, gently as the snow falls around us. Imagine yourself standing in a shallow trench, the earth beneath you frozen solid, its surface glistening with a thin crust of frost that crunches faintly underfoot. The wind moves through the trees, a low, mournful howl that carries the chill of winter deep into your bones. It is December 1944, and you are in the Ardennes, a sprawling region where Belgium, Luxembourg, and Germany meet. Its dense forests cloaked in snow, its hills silent under a heavy, grey sky. The air is sharp, tinged with the scent of pine, damp earth, and something else, something metallic. Perhaps the faint echo of fear or the lingering memory of blood. You are not alone. Around you, soldiers huddle in their foxholes, their faces half hidden beneath wool scarves, their eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. This is the front line of the Ardennes, where American and German soldiers endure a relentless winter, their lives shaped by cold, hunger, and a quiet dread that seeps into every moment. The American soldiers, many from divisions like the 28th or 106th Infantry, are scattered across a thinly held line, their positions stretched across miles of rugged terrain. They are young men, some barely out of high school, others hardened by earlier campaigns but now worn down, their bodies aching from weeks of unyielding duty. Their uniforms, olive drab and poorly suited for the biting cold, are patched and sodden, offering little protection against temperatures that plunge below zero. Picture their boots, caked with frozen mud, the leather stiff and unyielding, their toes numb despite the layers of socks they've scavenged or traded for. The army-issued overcoats are too thin, and many soldiers wrap blankets or scraps of burlap around their shoulders, anything to hold back the chill that seems to settle into their very marrow. Their days begin long before dawn, when the world is still cloaked in shadow. A soldier wakes to the faint rustle of his comrades stirring, the soft clink of a canteen brushing against a rifle, or the distant snap of a tree branch breaking under the weight of snow. Breakfast is a meager affair, a cold K ration pulled from a tin, perhaps a crumbling biscuit or a lump of processed cheese, eaten with fingers so stiff they struggle to grip the spoon. The men chew slowly, not out of savor but necessity, their jaws aching from the cold, their breath forming small clouds that vanish into the icy air. Coffee, when it can be had, is a rare treasure brewed over a small fire that must be carefully tended to avoid detection. The steam rises briefly, warming their faces for a fleeting moment before the wind snatches it away. The rhythm of their lives is dictated by the cold, an ever-present force that shapes every action, every thought. Imagine yourself crouching in a foxhole, a shallow pit dug into the frozen earth, its walls slick, with ice that glints faintly in the moonlight. The soldiers line these holes with pine branches or scraps of cardboard, anything to create a barrier between their bodies and the ground that seems to draw warmth from them like a living thing. They sit for hours, their rifles cradled in their laps, their breath forming delicate clouds that drift upward and dissolve. The silence is heavy, broken only by the occasional crack of a twig or the faint hum of a distant airplane, sounds that send a jolt of tension through the men, their hearts pounding as they strain to determine whether it's a deer, a falling branch, or the enemy creeping closer. Every noise is a potential threat, and the soldiers learn to live with this constant, quiet fear, their senses sharpened by necessity. Comradeship is their anchor in this frozen world. Picture a group of soldiers gathered around a small fire, their faces lit by the flickering glow, their hands cupped around tin mugs or outstretched toward the feeble warmth. They share stories, not of battles or heroics, but of home a mother's kitchen filled with the smell of fresh bread, a high school dance under a harvest moon, the sound of a dog barking in a quiet neighborhood. These stories are told in low, measured tones, as if speaking too loudly might break the fragile peace of the moment. They pass a single cigarette from man to man, each taking a careful drag before handing it to the next, the ember glowing like a tiny star in the darkness. Their laughter, when it comes, is dry and subdued, a way to push back against the despair that lingers at the edges of their thoughts. Some write letters, their pencils scratching faintly on damp paper, words meant for loved ones they may never see again. The act of writing is slow, deliberate, each letter a small act of defiance against the cold and the fear that threatened to consume them. The isolation is profound, a weight that presses down on them as heavily as the snow. The Ardennes is a vast, sprawling wilderness, its forests stretching for miles, and the American lines are stretched thin, sometimes with miles between outposts. A soldier might go days without seeing an officer or receiving fresh supplies. Their only connection to the outside world a radio that crackles with static, its messages fragmented and faint. Loneliness settles over them like a second skin, heavy and unrelenting. Some talk to themselves, their voices barely audible, or to their rifles, giving them names as if they were old friends. Others carve small mementos from scraps of wood across a name, a date tokens to remind them of who they are when the cold threatens to strip their identity away. They sing too, though the songs are soft, almost whispered, old hymns or folk tunes that drift into the night, swallowed by the wind. Across the lines, the German soldiers face their own version of this frozen existence. There lives a mirror of the Americans, but shaped by different burdens. They are a mix of veterans and conscripts, some hardened by years on the Eastern Front, others young boys drafted in the Reich's final, desperate days. Their uniforms, once the proud grey of the Wehrmacht, are tattered now, patched with whatever scraps they can find, the wool matted with mud and ice. Their greatcoats are heavier than the Americans, but no less worn, offering only a fleeting defense against the cold. Their boots, too, are inadequate, many wrapped in rags to keep out the snow. Their toes as numb as those of their enemies. The Germans are better equipped in some ways, with thicker blankets and occasional access to hot meals, but their supplies are dwindling, and the weight of defeat hangs over them like a shadow. They know the war is slipping away, yet they fight on, driven by duty, fear, or the faint hope of a miracle. Their trenches are deeper, more methodical, reflecting the discipline of their training, but no less miserable. Imagine their foxholes lined with evergreen boughs, the faint smell of resin mingling with the odor of unwashed bodies and damp wool. They huddle around small fires, though they are more cautious than the Americans, aware that a stray spark could betray their position to an unseen enemy. Their rations are sparse, often just a thin soup or a chunk of black bread, sometimes frozen solid by the time it reaches them. They eat in silence, their eyes hollow, their thoughts turned inward. The veterans among them speak little, their faces etched with the exhaustion of years at war, while the younger soldiers, some barely 16, look to them for guidance, their fear palpable in the way they clutch their rifles. The cold is a shared enemy, binding American and German soldiers in a strange, unspoken kinship. Both sides suffer from frostbite, their fingers and toes turning black at the edges, the pain a constant companion. They wrap their hands in rags, rub them together to coax feeling back, but the cold is relentless, seeping into their joints, making every movement a small agony. They dream of warmth, a hot meal, a dry bed, a fire that doesn't sputter, and die in the wind, but such dreams are fleeting, chased away by the reality of their frozen world. The nights are the worst, when the temperature plummets and the darkness feels absolute. Imagine yourself lying in a foxhole, the ground hard beneath you, the cold pressing against your back like a living thing. The soldiers pull their blankets tight, though the thin wool does little to keep out the chill. Some try to sleep, their bodies curled into tight balls, their breath shallow to conserve warmth. Others keep watch, their eyes straining against the darkness, the faint glow of a flare or the distant flash of artillery fire the only light in the endless night. The sounds of the forest are both a comfort and a torment, the soft rustle of snow falling from a branch, the creak of trees bending in the wind, the occasional howl of a wolf in the distance. Each sound carries a question. Is it nature or is it the enemy? The soldiers learn to live with this uncertainty, their nerves frayed but their resolve unbroken. The American soldiers, despite their youth and inexperience, find ways to adapt. They learn to build small shelters from branches and snow, crude lean-tos that offer a sliver of protection from the wind. They trade tips for staying warm, stuffing newspapers into their boots, rubbing snow on their faces to prevent frostbite, keeping their rifles close to their bodies to prevent the metal from freezing. They share what little they have, a can of beans split between for men, a chocolate bar broken into tiny pieces, each morsel savored as if it were a feast. The Germans, too, have their own rituals of survival. They are meticulous in their preparations, digging their trenches with precision, layering their foxholes with boughs to insulate against the cold. They boil snow for water, though the process is slow and the result barely lukewarm. They tell stories, too, though their tales are tinged with the bitterness of a war they know they are losing. They speak of their hometowns of Berlin or Munich, of families they haven't seen in years. Their voice is soft and wistful. The cold binds them, American and German alike, in a shared struggle against the elements. But it also isolates them, each man alone with his thoughts, his fears, his memories. The days blur together, each one a repetition of the last watch: eat, sleep, survive. The soldiers mark time by small rituals, the lighting of a cigarette, the cleaning of a rifle, the writing of a letter they may never send. They find comfort in these routines, a way to impose order on the chaos of their lives. The Americans, with their easy camaraderie, lean on each other, their laughter a defiance of the cold and a fear. The Germans, more reserved, find solace in discipline, in the structure of their training, though even this begins to fray under the weight of exhaustion. Both sides carry the same burdens: hunger, cold, the constant spectre of death, but they carry them in their own ways, shaped by their cultures, their histories, their hopes. The Ardennes is a place of contrasts where the beauty of the snow-covered forest clashes with the harshness of war, where the silence of the night is broken by the sudden roar of artillery, where the warmth of comradeship battles the cold of isolation. Imagine yourself there, in the quiet moments between the chaos, listening to the soft fall of snow, the distant crack of a branch, the faint murmur of voices. The soldiers, American and German, are bound by this place, their lives intertwined in the frozen crucible of the front line. They wait, they endure, they survive. Each moment a small victory against the cold and the fear that threatened to overwhelm them. And yet, even in this frozen stillness, the world is about to change. The quiet of the Ardennes, so carefully guarded by these weary men, is on the verge of shattering. Across the lines, in the German camps, Plans are being made, orders whispered in the dark, a desperate gamble that will shake the forest and the men within it. The rhythm of their lives, so steady, so relentless, is about to be broken by the thunder of a counteroffensive, a storm that will sweep through the snow and change the course of the war. Let us step forward now, gently, into the chaos that awaits, as the German forces prepare to unleash their final, desperate strike. The quiet of the Ardennes, so carefully guarded by the weary soldiers in their frozen trenches, is about to shatter. Imagine yourself standing in the pre-dawn darkness of December 16, 1944, the air thick with frost, the forest silent save for the faint crunch of snow underfoot. The American soldiers, huddled in their foxholes, their breath visible in the cold, believe the front is stable, a quiet sector where the war has slowed to a crawl. They are wrong. Across the lines, in the German camps hidden deep within the forest, a storm is gathering. The German forces, battered by years of war, are preparing a desperate gamble, a final, furious counteroffensive that will shake the snow-laden trees and send ripples of chaos through the Allied lines. This is the beginning of Wacht am Rhein, the German code name for the Ardennes offensive, a plan born of desperation, ambition, and the fading hope of a Reich on the brink of collapse. Let us step gently into this moment, tracing the threads of history that led to this frozen maelstrom, and walk through the early days of a battle that would become a nightmare etched in snow and blood. The context for this offensive begins months earlier, in the summer of 1944, when the Allies landed in Normandy and began their relentless push across France. The German army, once a juggernaut, was reeling. The Eastern Front had drained their resources, their cities were crumbling under Allied bombs, and their forces in the West were battered by the rapid advance of American, British, and Canadian troops. By autumn, the Allies had crossed the German border in some places, and the end of the war seemed tantalizingly close. But Adolf Hitler, cloistered in his headquarters, refused to accept defeat. Picture him poring over maps, his hands trembling, his mind fixed on a bold, reckless plan. The Ardennes, he believed, was the key, a rugged, forested region where the American lines were thinly held, manned by inexperienced troops or battle-weary divisions sent there to rest. The German High Command, though skeptical, followed his orders, and thus was born Wacht am Rhein, a plan to drive a wedge through the Allied forces, capture the vital port of Antwerp and split the American and British armies, forcing a negotiated peace. The objective was audacious, almost delusional, given Germany's dwindling resources, but it was fueled by the desperation of a regime with nothing left to lose. Imagine the German preparations hidden under the cover of the forest. In the weeks leading up to December, troops and tanks were moved under strict secrecy, their movements concealed by the dense trees and the long winter nights. The Germans assembled a formidable force, some to 150,000 men, nearly 1,000 tanks, and thousands of artillery pieces drawn from the remnants of their armies. These were not the elite forces of earlier years. Many were young conscripts, barely trained, or veterans exhausted by years of fighting. Fuel was scarce, supplies erratic, and morale uneven, but the promise of a decisive blow kept them moving. Picture the soldiers loading shells into artillery pieces, their hands numb from the cold, their faces set in grim determination. Tanks, painted white to blend with the snow, rumbled into position, their engines coughing in the frigid air. The commanders, men like Field Marshal Walter Model and General Hasso von Manteuffel, knew the odds were against them, but they pressed forward, driven by duty and the faint hope of turning the tide. The Americans, meanwhile, were blissfully unaware. Intelligence reports had hinted at German activity, but the Allied High Command dismissed the possibility of a major offensive. The Ardennes was considered a quiet sector, a place to rest divisions battered by earlier campaigns or to plug new units. Like the 106th Infantry, the soldiers, as we saw in their frozen trenches, were focused on survival, not on the possibility of a massive attack. Imagine their surprise then, when the pre-dawn silence of December 16th was shattered by a deafening roar. At 5:30 a.m., the German artillery opened fire, a barrage of thousands of shells that lit up the sky and shook the earth. The forest erupted in flashes of light, the air filled with the scream of projectiles and the thunder of explosions. Trees splintered, snow was blasted into the air, and the American lines were thrown into chaos. Picture the soldiers scrambling from their foxholes, their faces pale, their hands fumbling for rifles as the ground trembled beneath them. The barrage lasted for hours, a relentless assault that tore through their defenses and sowed panic in the ranks. When the artillery finally fell silent, the German infantry and tanks surged forward, their advance cloaked by fog and snow. The Americans, caught off guard, fought back with whatever they had: rifles, machine guns, a few anti-tank guns, but their lines were too thin, their positions scattered. Imagine the chaos of those first hours, the shouts of sergeants trying to rally their men, the crackle of gunfire echoing through the forest, the distant rumble of tanks growing louder. The Germans moved with ruthless efficiency, their panzer divisions slicing through the American defenses, their infantry following in their wake. Entire units were overrun, their foxholes abandoned, their equipment left scattered in the snow. The 106th Infantry, newly arrived and untested, bore the brunt of the assault. 2 of its regiments were surrounded, cut off in the Schnee-Eifel, a hilly region east of the front. Picture these men trapped in their positions, their radios buzzing with desperate calls for help that went unanswered. They fought bravely, but the odds were overwhelming. By the end of the first day, thousands were captured, their surrender a bitter necessity as German tanks rolled past, their treads crunching through the snow. The German advance was swift, but it was not without cost. The forest terrain, with its narrow roads and dense woods, slowed their tanks, and the snow made movement treacherous. Fuel shortages plagued their armored units, and many tanks were abandoned when their supplies ran dry. The soldiers, too, suffered in the cold, their greatcoats heavy with snow, their boots soaked through. Imagine a German infantryman, his breath visible in the frigid air, trudging through knee-deep snow, his rifle slung over his shoulder, his eyes scanning the trees for American snipers. The advance was relentless, but it was also fragile, a gamble that depended on speed, surprise, and the hope that the Allies would crumble. For the Americans, the first days were a nightmare of confusion and retreat. Picture a young private, his face smudged with dirt, running through the forest as shells explode around him. His unit is scattered, his officers dead or missing, and he has no idea where the front line is. He stumbles through the snow, his heart pounding, his fingers numb around his rifle. Behind him, the glow of burning vehicles lights up the sky, the wreckage of jeeps and trucks left smoldering in the cold. The Germans pushed deeper, creating a bulge in the American lines, hence the name Battle of the Bulge, that stretched for miles. Towns like St. Vith and Clervaux fell quickly, their defenders overwhelmed by the sheer weight of the German assault. The roads, already treacherous with ice, became choked with refugees and retreating soldiers, their faces etched with exhaustion and fear. Yet even in this chaos, there were moments of resistance. Imagine a small group of Americans holed up in a farmhouse, their machine guns trained on a narrow road. They hold off a German advance for hours, their ammunition dwindling, their breath ragged in the cold. These pockets of defiance slowed the German tide, buying time for the Allies to regroup. But they came at a heavy cost. The soldiers fought not just for survival, but for each other. Their bonds forged in the frozen trenches, now tested in the heat of battle. The German offensive was not without its darker moments. In the town of Malmedy, on December 17th, a group of American prisoners, captured during the initial advance, were herded into a field by members of the 1st SS Panzer Division. Picture these men, their hands raised, their faces pale in the dim light of a winter afternoon. Without warning, the Germans opened fire, the crack of machine guns echoing across the snow. Dozens fell, their lives extinguished in moments, their bodies left in the field as the Germans moved on. This was the Malmedy massacre, a grim reminder of the war's brutality, though we speak of it softly here, focusing not on the horror but on the weight of lives lost, the silence that followed the snow that fell gently over the scene. News of the massacre spread quickly, hardening the resolve of American soldiers who fought with renewed determination, their fear tempered by anger. The German plan hinged on capturing key objectives: and one of the most critical was the town of Bastogne, a hub of roads vital to their advance. By December 20th, German forces had surrounded the town, cutting off the American defenders inside. Picture the scene. Bastogne, a small Belgian town, its streets blanketed in snow, its buildings scarred by artillery fire. The Americans, primarily from the 101st Airborne Division, were trapped, their supplies dwindling, their position precarious. The Germans expected a quick surrender, but the defenders, led by men like Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, refused to yield. Their defiance would become legendary, but we will save that story for the next chapter of our journey. For now, imagine the chaos of those early days. The German advance carving a path through the forest, the Americans reeling but not broken. The snow continued to fall, heavy and unrelenting, covering the tracks of tanks, the footprints of soldiers, the scars of battle. The forest, once a place of quiet endurance, was now a battlefield, its silence shattered by the roar of guns and the cries of men. The German offensive, though initially successful, was already showing signs of strain. Fuel shortages forced commanders to abandon tanks, their hulks left frozen in the snow. The weather, a double-edged sword, hampered both sides, the fog and snow concealing German movements but also slowing their advance. The Americans, though battered, began to rally, their commanders scrambling to reinforce the lines. To hold key towns and crossroads, picture a staff officer in a makeshift command post, maps spread across a table, his breath visible in the cold as he issues orders over a crackling radio. The tide was not yet turning, but the seeds of resistance were being sown. Small acts of courage that would grow into something greater. The soldiers, American and German, fought not just against each other but against the elements, their bodies pushed to the limits of endurance. Imagine a German tank crew, their vehicle stalled in a snowdrift, their hands blistered from trying to free the tracks. Imagine an American infantryman, his fingers frozen around his rifle, his eyes scanning the trees for the flash of a muzzle. The battle was a test of will, of survival, and the cost was staggering. Thousands fell in those first days, their lives lost to the cold, the bullets, the shells that rained from the sky. The snow, once pristine, was stained with the evidence of their struggle, a silent testament to the price of war. As the German advance pushed deeper, the forest seemed to close in around them, its trees looming like silent witnesses to the chaos. The Americans, though pushed back, held on to key positions, their defiance a spark in the darkness. The battle was far from over, and the town of Bastogne, now surrounded, would become the focal point of this frozen struggle. Let us pause here in the midst of the chaos, the snow falling softly around us, and turn our gaze to that beleaguered town where a handful of men stood against the tide, their courage a beacon in the winter night. Let us step gently forward into the heart of Bastogne, where the story of defiance and endurance awaits. The snow falls gently over Bastogne, a small Belgian town nestled in the heart of the Ardennes, its streets blanketed in white, its buildings scarred by the relentless drumbeat of war. It is late December 1944, and a German offensive, Wacht am Rhein, has carved a deep bulge into the American lines, surrounding this unassuming crossroads town that now holds the key to the entire campaign. Imagine yourself standing on the outskirts, where the air is thick with the scent of pine, gunpowder, and the faint, acrid tang of burning metal. The silence of the winter night is broken by the distant boom of artillery, the soft crunch of boots on snow, and the low murmurs of men preparing for the fight of their lives. This is Bastogne, a fortress in the snow where the men of the 101st Airborne Division, along with elements of other units, stand defiant against the encircling German forces. They are cut off, low on supplies, and facing a relentless enemy, yet their resolve is unshaken, their spirits tempered by the cold and the knowledge that surrender is not an option. Let us step softly into their world, into the frozen streets and foxholes of Bastogne, where every moment is a test of endurance, courage, and the unbreakable bonds of comradeship. The 101st Airborne, known as the Screaming Eagles, are paratroopers, elite soldiers trained for rapid deployment behind enemy lines, but here in Bastogne, they are fighting a different kind of battle. They are not dropping from the sky but holding a perimeter. A roughly circular line of defense around the town, their foxholes dug into the frozen earth, their weapons trained on the snow-covered fields beyond. Picture these men, their faces gaunt from hunger, their eyes red from lack of sleep, their hands wrapped in rags to protect against the biting cold. Their uniforms are tattered, their boots soaked through, yet they stand watch, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air, their rifles at the ready. The cold is their constant companion, a force as relentless as the enemy, seeping into their bones, numbing their fingers and clouding their thoughts. Imagine the weight of it, the way it presses against you, making every movement a small act of defiance. The soldiers wrap themselves in whatever they can find: blankets, scraps of canvas, even parachutes salvaged from earlier drops, anything to hold back the chill that threatens to sap their strength. Their foxholes are shallow, the ground too hard to dig deep, lined with pine branches or bits of cardboard to keep their bodies off the frozen earth. They huddle in these pits, 2 or 3 men to a hole, sharing body heat, their voices low as they trade stories or jokes to keep the darkness at bay. The siege of Bastogne begins in earnest on December 20th. AS German forces complete their encirclement, cutting off the town from Allied supply lines. The Americans, numbering roughly 11,000, are outnumbered, facing elements of 3 German divisions, including the elite Panzerlehr and the 2nd Panzer Division. The Germans expect a quick victory, believing the trapped paratroopers will crumble under the weight of their assault. Picture the German commanders, confident in their tanks and artillery, sending a message to the American defenders on December 22nd, demanding their surrender. The response, delivered by Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, is a single word: nuts. This defiant retort, scribbled on a piece of paper and sent back to the Germans, becomes a symbol of the 101st's resolve, a quiet but unyielding refusal to yield. Imagine the moment. The American officers gathered in a cramped command post, the air thick with cigarette smoke and tension as they read the German ultimatum and craft their reply. The word spreads quickly among the troops, passed from foxhole to foxhole, bringing a flicker of grim amusement to men who have little else to laugh about. The defense of Bastogne is a grueling ordeal, defined not by grand charges or sweeping maneuvers, but by the relentless, grinding rhythm of survival. The Germans unleash a barrage of artillery, shells screaming through the air, exploding in bursts of fire and snow that shake the earth. Imagine the sound, a deafening roar that seems to come from all directions, the ground trembling as shrapnel whistles overhead. The soldiers hunker down in their foxholes, their heads pressed against the frozen earth, their hands gripping their rifles as they wait for the barrage to end. When it does, the Germans advance, their tanks rumbling through the snow, their infantry moving in dark, shadowy waves across the fields. The Americans respond with everything they have: machine guns, mortars, bazookas firing from their positions, their aim steady despite the cold that numbs their fingers. The fighting is close, often at ranges of mere yards, the crack of rifles and the chatter of machine guns filling the air. Picture a paratrooper, his face blackened by gunpowder, leaning out of his foxhole to fire a bazooka at an approaching tank. The rocket streaking through the snow, its explosion lighting up the night. The tank grinds to a halt, its hull smoldering, but another takes its place and the battle continues, relentless and unyielding. The cold is as much an enemy as the Germans. Temperatures drop to 20 degrees below zero and frostbite claims fingers and toes, leaving men to wrap their extremities in rags, rubbing them constantly to restore circulation. Imagine the pain. A dull ache that becomes a sharp, burning sensation. The body's desperate protest against the unrelenting chill. Food is scarce, the men subsisting on whatever they can scavenge: K-rations, a few cans of beans, or the occasional chocolate bar shared among a dozen. Hunger gnaws at them, a constant presence that saps their strength. Yet they ration their meager supplies with care, knowing there may be no more. Water is another challenge, the soldiers melting snow in their helmets over small fires. The process slow and laborious, the result barely enough to quench their thirst. Medical supplies are critically low, and the medics, working in makeshift aid stations, do what they can with limited bandages and morphine. Picture a medic, his hands trembling from cold and exhaustion, bandaging a wounded soldier in the dim light of a lantern. the air filled with the moans of the injured and the distant rumble of artillery. The nights in Bastogne are the hardest, when the darkness seems absolute, broken only by the occasional flare that casts a ghostly light over the snow. The soldiers take turns keeping watch, their eyes straining against the blackness, their ears attuned to every sound: the crunch of snow, the snap of a twig, the low growl of a tank engine. Sleep is a luxury, snatched in brief moments between shifts, the men curling up in their foxholes, their bodies shivering despite the layers of clothing. Imagine trying to sleep in such a place, the cold pressing against you, the sounds of battle never far away, the knowledge that death could come at any moment. Yet sleep does come, fitful and uneasy, a brief escape from the reality of the siege. The soldiers find ways to cope, their resilience a testament to the human spirit. They tell stories, not of glory, but of Homer Farm in Iowa, a street in Chicago, a girl waiting back in Ohio. These stories are a lifeline, a reminder of why they fight, why they endure. They share what little they have: a sip of coffee, a piece of hard candy, a cigarette passed from hand to hand, its ember glowing in the dark. They joke, too, their humor dark but vital, a way to push back against the fear and despair. Picture a group of paratroopers, their faces smudged with dirt, laughing quietly over a shared memory, their voices low to avoid detection. These moments of connection, fleeting though they are, sustain them, binding them together in the face of overwhelming odds. The Germans, meanwhile, press their attack, their tanks and infantry probing the American lines. For weaknesses, the fighting is fiercest on the perimeter, where small villages like Marvy and Champs become battlegrounds, their streets littered with debris and the wreckage of war. Imagine a squad of Americans, holed up in a shattered farmhouse, their machine guns trained on a snow-covered road. They repel wave after wave of German infantry, their ammunition running low, their bodies pushed to the limits of endurance. The Germans, too, suffer in the cold, their tanks bogged down in snowdrifts, their soldiers exhausted by the relentless pace of the offensive. Fuel shortages plague their armored units, and many tanks are abandoned, their hulks left frozen in the fields. The German soldiers, like their American counterparts, are hungry, cold and tired, their morale fraying as the siege drags on. Yet they fight with a desperate ferocity, driven by the knowledge that this may be their last chance to turn the tide of the war. The Americans, despite their dire situation, find moments of ingenuity. They repurpose captured German weapons, using Panzerfausts against enemy tanks, their explosions lighting up the night. They scavenge supplies from wrecked vehicles, dragging crates of ammunition through the snow, their hands blistered and bleeding. They improvise defenses, piling snow into makeshift barriers, reinforcing their foxholes with logs and stones. Picture a young lieutenant, his face drawn with exhaustion, directing his men to fortify a position, his voice calm but firm, a steadying presence in the chaos. The medics, too, perform miracles under impossible conditions, treating wounds with whatever they have, their hands steady despite the cold and the constant threat of shelling. The siege is not just a battle of weapons but of wills, a test of who can endure longer, who can hold out against the cold, the hunger and the fear. The Americans are bolstered by their commanders, men like McAuliffe, whose quiet confidence inspires those around him. Imagine him walking the lines, his greatcoat dusted with snow, stopping to speak with his men, his words simple but powerful, reminding them that they are not alone, that they are part of something greater. The soldiers draw strength from this, their resolve hardening even as their bodies weaken. The civilians of Bastogne, to play a role, their homes turned into aid stations, their cellars sheltering the wounded. Picture a Belgian woman, her face lined with worry, offering a cup of weak tea to a shivering soldier, her kindness a small but vital act of defiance. The town itself becomes a character in this drama, its streets a maze of snow and rubble, its church spire a landmark for the defenders, a reminder of the world they are fighting to protect. The days blend together, each one a repetition of the last shelling, fighting, waiting, enduring. The soldiers mark time by small rituals, the cleaning of a rifle, the writing of a letter, the sharing of a cigarette. They find comfort in these routines, a way to impose order on the chaos of their lives. The cold, the hunger, the fear, they are constants. But so too is their determination, their refusal to break. The Germans, sensing weakness, intensify their attacks, their artillery pounding the town, their tanks probing for a gap in the defenses. Yet the Americans hold, their lines bending but not breaking. Their foxholes a testament to their stubborn resolve. The snow continues to fall, covering the scars of battle, softening the outlines of the wrecked tanks and shattered buildings. The air is filled with the sounds of war, but there are quieter moments to the soft murmur of a prayer, the rustle of a letter being folded, the faint crackle of a radio bringing news of distant relief. The soldiers know that help is coming, that General Patton's Third Army is fighting its way north through the snow. But they also know they must hold until it arrives. Their fight is not just for Barstow, but for each other, for the men beside them in the foxholes, for the ideals they carry in their hearts. As the siege drags on, the cost becomes clearer. The fields around Barstow are littered with the fallen, their bodies covered by snow, their sacrifice a silent weight on the survivors. The medics work tirelessly, but there are too many wounded to few supplies. Picture a soldier, his legs shattered by shrapnel, lying in a makeshift aid station. His face pale, but his voice steady as he asks about his friends. The medics do what they can, their hands moving with practiced care. But the reality is stark, many will not survive the night. The soldiers know this, yet they fight on, their courage a light in the darkness. The siege of Barstow is a story of endurance, of men pushed to their limits but refusing to yield. It is a story of small acts of bravery, of quiet moments of connection, of a town that became a symbol of defiance. As the snow falls, the defenders hold their ground, their foxholes a fragile bulwark against a German tide. But the tide is turning, slowly, inexorably. Far to the south, General Patton's tanks are rumbling through the snow, their treads chewing up the frozen roads, their crews driven by the knowledge that their comrades in Barstow are counting on them. The siege is not the end of the story, but a pivotal chapter, a moment when the course of the battle and the war hung in the balance. Let us step forward now, gently, into the final days of the Ardennes offensive, where the snow falls like a curtain, and the clash of armies will decide the fate of the forest and the men within it. The snow continues to fall over the Ardennes, a relentless curtain that cloaks the scarred landscape of Barstow and the sprawling forest beyond, softening the outlines of shattered tanks and fallen men. It is late December 1944, and the Battle of the Bulge, born of Germany's desperate gamble, has reached a turning point. The defenders of Barstow, battered but unyielding, hold their ground against the encircling German forces, their foxholes a fragile line of defiance in the frozen wilderness. Yet the tide is shifting as help approaches from the south, where General George S. Patton's Third Army fights its way through the snow, their tanks grinding forward, their resolve as unyielding as the winter itself. Imagine yourself standing on a snow-covered ridge, the air sharp with the scent of pine and gunpowder, the distant rumble of artillery a constant reminder of the battle's ferocity. This is the final chapter of the Ardennes offensive, a story of exhaustion, sacrifice, and the staggering cost of a war that refuses to end quietly. Let us step gently into these final days, tracing the path of Patton's counterattack, the German retreat, and the heavy toll exacted on both sides. As the forest bears witness to the end of a nightmare, the relief of Barstow begins on December 26th, when the first tanks of the 4th Armored Division, part of Patton's Third Army, break through the German lines to reach the beleaguered town. Picture the moment, the snow swirling around a column of Sherman tanks, their treads chewing through the icy roads, their crews exhausted but driven by the knowledge that their comrades are counting on them. The defenders, their faces gaunt from hunger and cold, hear the distant growl of engines, a sound that stirs hope in their weary hearts. The link-up is not a moment of triumph but of quiet relief as the tanks roll into Barstow, their hulls dusted with snow, their crews greeted by soldiers who have held the line against impossible odds. Imagine a paratrooper, his hands wrapped in rags, stepping out of his foxhole to wave at the approaching tanks, his smile faint but genuine, a flicker of light in the darkness of the siege. The relief of Barstow is a turning point, but it is not the end of the battle. The Germans, though weakened, are far from defeated, and the fighting continues across the Ardennes. A brutal slog through snow and mud that tests the endurance of both sides. Patton's forces, renowned for their speed and aggression, push northward, their tanks and infantry moving through the frozen forest, their objective to collapse the German bulge and restore the Allied lines. Picture the scene, a column of tanks winding along a narrow road, their exhaust mingling with the falling snow, their crews scanning the trees for enemy positions. The roads are treacherous, slick with ice and clogged with wrecked vehicles, but the Americans press forward, their momentum relentless. The Germans, meanwhile, are faltering, their offensive stretched thin by fuel shortages, dwindling supplies, and the relentless cold. Imagine a German tank crew, their panzers stalled in a snowdrift, their hands blistered from trying to free the tracks, their faces etched with exhaustion as they realize the fuel will not last. Their commanders, men like Hasse von Manteuffel, know the offensive has lost its momentum, but they fight on, driven by desperation and the orders of a distant Führer who refuses to accept defeat. The battles that follow are fierce, fought in small villages in dense woods, where every crossroads becomes a killing ground. Picture a skirmish in a hamlet like Noville, just north of Bastogne, where American infantry clash with German panzer grenadiers, their rifles and machine guns barking. In the cold air, their breath-forming clouds as they fight house to house. The snow is stained with the evidence of their struggle, a grim reminder of the cost of every yard gained or lost. The Americans, bolstered by fresh supplies and reinforcements, fight with a renewed sense of purpose, their lines holding firm against German counterattacks. The Germans, by contrast, are running out of everything: fuel, ammunition, men. Their tanks, once the spearhead of the offensive, are abandoned in droves. Their hulls frozen in the snow, their crews forced to retreat on foot. Imagine a German soldier, his greatcoat heavy with ice, trudging through the forest, his rifle slung over his shoulder, his eyes hollow with the weight of defeat. The cold, which has plagued both sides throughout the campaign, remains a relentless foe, slowing movements, numbing fingers, and sapping strength. The Americans, though better supplied now, still suffer, their boots soaked through, their hands aching as they grit their weapons. Picture a young private, his face smudged with dirt, pausing to rub his hands together, trying to coax feeling back into his fingers before returning to his post. The Germans, with their supply lines crumbling, fare even worse, their rations reduced to scraps, their fires barely enough to keep them alive. The soldiers on both sides dream of warmth, of a hot meal, of a dry bed, but such dreams are fleeting, chased away by the reality of the frozen battlefield. The fighting is not just a clash of armies, but of wills, a test of who can endure longer, who can withstand the cold, the hunger, and the fear. The Americans, under Patton's relentless drive, push forward, their tanks and artillery hammering German positions, their infantry clearing villages one by one. The Germans, their forces depleted, fight defensive battles, their lines contracting as they struggle to hold ground. Imagine a German machine gun nest hidden in a copse of trees, its crew firing until their ammunition runs dry, their position overrun by American infantry who move with grim determination. The battles are small but brutal, fought in the shadow of the forest, the snow falling like a shroud over the fallen. The cost of the battle is staggering, a toll measured not just in lives but in the quiet suffering of those who survive. The Americans lose nearly 90,000 men killed, wounded, or missing, their bodies scattered across the snow-covered fields. Their sacrifice a silent weight on the survivors. The Germans fare even worse, with over 100,000 casualties, their ranks decimated by the failed offensive. Picture a field hospital, its tents sagging under the weight of snow, its medics working tirelessly to save the wounded, their hands steady despite the cold and exhaustion. The wounded lie in rows, their faces pale, their breath shallow, some whispering prayers, others silent, their eyes fixed on a distant point beyond the pain. The medics, with limited supplies, do what they can, their voices calm as they offer comfort, their hands moving with practiced care. The civilians of the Ardennes, caught in the crossfire, suffer as well, their homes destroyed, their lives upended by a war they did not choose. Imagine a Belgian farmer, his face lined with worry. Leading his family to a cellar as shells explode overhead, their world reduced to the faint hope of survival. The forest itself bears the scars of the battle, its trees splintered by artillery, its paths churned into mud by the treads of tanks. Yet the snow continues to fall, covering the wreckage, softening the outlines of the destruction. As if nature itself seeks to heal the wounds of war, the German retreat, by early January 1945, is inevitable, their forces too depleted to continue the fight. Picture a column of German soldiers, their heads bowed against the wind, retreating through the forest, their boots sinking into the snow, their faces etched with the bitterness of defeat. Their tanks, once the pride of the Wehrmacht, are left behind, their hulks frozen in the fields, a testament to the failure of Hitler's gamble. The Americans, though victorious, are exhausted, their ranks thinned by the brutal campaign. Imagine a soldier, his rifle slung over his shoulder, pausing to look back at the battlefield, the snow falling softly around him, the silence heavy with the weight of what has been lost. The Battle of the Bulge, the last major German offensive of the war, ends not with a dramatic flourish but with a slow, grinding retreat, the forest reclaiming its quiet as the guns fall silent. The Ardennes offensive is a pivotal moment, a final, desperate strike that delays the Allied advance but cannot stop it. By the end of January, the bulge in the American lines is erased, the front restored, and the path to Germany lies open. The Germans, their resources spent, their morale broken, face the inevitability of defeat. Their collapse just months away in the spring of 1945. The Americans, though battered, emerge stronger, their resolve hardened by the trial of the Ardennes. The soldiers who have endured the cold, the hunger, and the fear carry the memory of this battle in their hearts, a quiet burden they will bear for the rest of their lives. Picture a young paratrooper sitting in a liberated Barstone, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, the first hot drink he's had in weeks, his eyes distant as he thinks of the friends he has lost. The civilians, too, begin to rebuild, their homes scarred but their spirits unbroken. Their gratitude to the Americans expressed in small acts of kindness, a loaf of bread, a warm blanket, a quiet thank you. The forest, though wounded, endures, its trees standing sentinel over the fields, its snow covering the scars of battle. The Ardennes, once a quiet sector, has become a crucible, a place where men faced the worst of war and found within themselves the strength to endure. As we stand here in the fading light of winter, the snow falling softly around us, we see the cost of this battle, not just in numbers but in the lives forever changed, the dreams left unfulfilled, the silence that follows the guns. The Battle of the Bulge is over, but its echoes linger in the memories of the survivors, in the stories passed down, in the quiet beauty of a forest that has seen too much. Let us pause here in this moment of stillness and reflect on the price of war, the resilience of the human spirit, and the hope that even in the darkest of winters, spring will come. Let us step gently forward now to the conclusion of our journey, where we will gather these threads of cold, sacrifice, and endurance, and weave them into a final reflection, a soft farewell to the Ardennes and the men who fought there, as we return to the comfort of the present, as the snow settles over the Ardennes, blanketing the scarred fields and silent forests. The echoes of the Battle of the Bulge fade into the stillness of winter's end. It is January 1945, and the fierce struggle that defined this frozen landscape has drawn to a close, leaving behind a legacy of sacrifice, resilience, and the unyielding rhythm of survival. Imagine yourself standing on a quiet hill, the air crisp and cold, the ground beneath you softened by fresh snow that covers the traces of battle that churned earth, the shattered trees, the remnants of lives lost. The forest is calm now, its silence a stark contrast to the chaos that once reigned here. The gunfire and artillery replaced by the soft rustle of snowflakes falling through the pines. The men who fought here, American and German alike, have left their mark on this place, their stories etched into the landscape, their struggles a testament to the human spirit's capacity to endure, even the darkest of winters. Let us walk gently through this final reflection, gathering the threads of our journey through the Ardennes, and find a moment of peace as we ease you toward rest, contrasting the hardships of the past with the comfort of the present, the Battle of the Bulge, fought in the bitter cold of December 1944, and January 1945 was a crucible, a moment when the fate of the war hung in the balance. The American soldiers, from the green recruits of the 106th Infantry to the battle-hardened paratroopers of the 101st, airborne, faced unimaginable challenges: hunger, cold, fear, and the relentless pressure of an enemy determined to break them. Picture those men, their faces drawn with exhaustion, their hands numb from the frost, standing watch in their foxholes, their breath visible in the moonlight. They fought not just for victory, but for each other, their bonds forged in the frozen trenches, strengthened by shared cigarettes, quiet laughter, and the simple act of enduring one more night. The Germans, too, carried their own burdens, their ranks filled with weary veterans and frightened boys, driven by a desperate hope that faltered with each passing day. Imagine a German soldier, his greatcoat heavy with snow, retreating through the forest, his steps slow and deliberate, his heart heavy with the weight of defeat. Their stories, though on opposite sides, are intertwined, bound by the shared struggle against the cold and the chaos of war. The cost of the battle is a heavy one, measured not just in the staggering numbers: nearly 90,000 American casualties, over 100,000 German losses, but in the quieter toll it took on those who survived. Picture a young American sitting in a liberated Bastogne, his hands wrapped around a tin cup of coffee, the warmth of small miracle after weeks of cold. His eyes are distant, his thoughts with the friends he has lost, the moments of fear and courage that will stay with him forever. The civilians of the Ardennes, too, bear the scars, their homes reduced to rubble, their lives upended by a war that swept through their towns like a storm. Yet they, too, showed resilience, offering shelter to soldiers, sharing what little they had, their kindness a light in the darkness. Imagine a Belgian woman, her face lined with worry, handing a loaf of bread to a shivering paratrooper, her gesture a quiet act of defiance against the despair of war. The forest itself, a silent witness to the battle, carries its own wounds, its trees splintered, its paths churned into mud, yet it endures, its beauty unbroken despite the violence it has seen. The snow, falling gently, covers the scars, softening the outlines of wrecked tanks and fallen men, as if nature seeks to heal what war has torn apart. The Battle of the Bulge was not just a military turning point, but a human one. A moment when ordinary men faced extraordinary challenges and found within themselves the strength to carry on. The American victory, hard-won through Patton's relentless counterattack and the stubborn defense of Bastogne, marked the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany, whose collapse would come just months later in the spring of 1945. Yet the victory was not a moment of triumph but of quiet resolve, a recognition that the war would go on, that more battles lay ahead, that the cost of freedom was paid in the lives of those who fought here. Picture the soldiers, American and German, as they leave the Ardennes, their faces etched with exhaustion, their hearts heavy but their spirits unbroken. They carry with them the memories of this frozen winter, the comrades they lost, the moments of courage that defined them. The civilians, too, begin to rebuild, their hands working to repair what was destroyed, their lives slowly returning to a semblance of normalcy. The forest, ever resilient, will heal in time, its trees growing tall again, its paths reclaimed by the quiet rhythm of nature. As we stand here in this moment of stillness, let us reflect on the contrast between the winter and the present. Imagine yourself now, not in the cold of the Ardennes, but in the warmth of your own space. The soft comfort of a bed, the quiet hum of the modern world around you. The soldiers of 194 weighing through a winter of hardship, their lives shaped by the relentless cold, the fear of the unknown, the weight of survival. You, dear listener, are far removed from that frozen forest, your world one of warmth and safety, a testament to the sacrifices made by those who came before. Their struggle, though distant, is a reminder of the fragility of peace, the cost of freedom, and the resilience of the human spirit. Let their stories settle over you like a blanket, heavy but comforting, as you drift toward rest. The Ardennes, with its snow-covered hills and silent pines, remains a place of memory, a landscape where the past lingers, its lessons quiet but profound. The men who fought there, who endured the cold and the fear, have left us a legacy of courage, A reminder that even in the darkest of winters there is hope, there is strength, there is the promise of spring. As you close your eyes, picture the forest one last time, the snow falling gently, the silence absolute, the battle of fading echo in the distance. Let the rhythm of history carry you forward into the soft embrace of sleep, where the cold of the Ardennes gives way to the warmth of the present and the struggles of the past. Become a quiet lullaby for the night,